Hey everybody, I am Vince of Geekvolution and welcome to Horror Movie Rewind. Warning! Some of these images may be graphic. I'll keep this short and ugly. Novels and films are both narrative mediums, with one basic goal in mind: to entertain. They both have protagonists, antagonists, supporting characters, and an order of events. The major difference is that pacing in a novel is afforded more time to build than a film does. A movie typically has to fit the entirety of its plot into 90 to 120 minutes. Once a movie jumps that 3-hour mark, people start getting antsy, they run out of popcorn, and they start having daydreams about dancing urinals. Novels have more space to meander. They have more time that can be devoted to exploring supporting characters, setting up the world, or indulging the narrator's whale fetish, or whatever. This is a luxury that film does not possess. Movies have to be to the point. A scene in a film has to support the whole. Ideally, scenes in a novel would be used the same way, but occasionally novels will take a side road to tell a story that supports characterization, but not so much the overall plot. Why is this important? Because this movie isn't just called Frankenstein, it's called Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It claims to have intimate relation to a person who died before the film medium came into being. By putting her name in the title, they claim that their movie is an accurate representation of her work. Interestingly, it's not necessarily a failed attempt, although it is problematic. The film hits all the highlights of the book that pertain to the stories of Victor Frankenstein and the monster. We experience Victor's obsession, regret, and fear. We also experience the monster's isolation and thirst for revenge. The novel and the film's plots are not radically different. It's like they tried to create the film version of Cliff Notes. The order of events are slightly changed, which takes away some of the complexities in characters' motivation. For example, instead of the monster accidentally killing Victor's younger brother, then claiming it was revenge, the monster just kills the boy out of revenge. They keep the plot point, but change the spirit behind it. The monster is thereby less likable, but he's still sympathetic due to circumstances. So in other words, not much can be said about the plot in the film without also talking about the novel. The major complaint that I have is the film's second plot point. By no means am I a purist. A film adaptation of a novel should be afforded some leeway with adding and removing scenes. I don't care that Clerval in the movie survived while the one in the novel was murdered by the monster. In the movie, Victor is given adequate tragedy without the monster also killing his friend. I would say that the death of most of Victor's family, including his wife, is enough to send a man overboard, so Clerval's death became ultimately unnecessary. But there is one scene that drives me nuts. After the monster kills Elizabeth, Victor brings her back to life. The entire movie is about Victor lamenting the life that he created. He comes to believe that what he did was evil. When the monster goes to Victor and demands that Victor make a female creature as a companion to the monster, Victor ultimately refuses. Victor recognizes that the life of the monster is a miserable one, so why would he want to condemn his murdered wife to the same fate? The filmmaker's logic is that he loves his wife so much that he would ignore the potential consequences. It's somewhat touching considering that he would love her despite the newly acquired monstrous visage. It's also somewhat selfish, which, as we've seen, Victor can sometimes be self-absorbed. That seems like decent motivation until the fact is considered that it conflicts with the through line. It doesn't make much sense. In the novel, his wife's death inspires him to vow revenge on the monster. But the filmmakers decided that the movie needed a climax outside of the bookends. Victor reanimates his wife despite his certainty that reanimating the dead is an evil act that spawns evil creatures. So when Elizabeth is reanimated, she remembers Victor but sees the monster as a kindred spirit. She therefore becomes torn between the two and ultimately decides to kill herself with a gas lantern, which hilariously results in the explosion of the apparently very combustible House of Frankenstein. We have no indication that De Niro's character has any recollection of his former life, other than certain skills like playing a musical instrument or speaking. So why does the amalgamation of Elizabeth and Justine remember Victor? And why doesn't she remember the monster who killed her? The monster's memory seems selective, or maybe it just needs to be rekindled. But the film doesn't supply adequate time for the re-education of Elizabeth. The monster at least had the family in Geneva where he learned how to talk again. By the way, the filmmakers seem to think that every location in the film is in Great Britain. Everyone speaks English with an English accent. Normally I wouldn't care, but the monster relearns language in Geneva. Wouldn't he have learned French like he did in the novel? The only explanation for Victor reanimating Elizabeth and Elizabeth's quick recollection is that the filmmakers tried to carry over the major theme of romantic literature, under which Mary Shelley's novel is classified. Science and logic are subjugated to the experience of the natural world and the expression of emotion. In romantic literature, emotion and natural experience are the only things that can lead to a truly fulfilled life. Victor chases his scientific ambition and ends up damning himself. For now, we'll ignore the irony of Victor's reliance on alchemy and pseudoscience, which thereby makes him an outcast within the scientific community. That's a topic for the novel and a much longer review. The movie doesn't really show this particularly much, other than overacting to show heightened emotions and ridiculous camera movements, but I'll get to that in a moment. Sometimes the acting is slow and subtle, mostly from De Niro. According to De Palma, who directed The Untouchables, De Niro is quite familiar with the subtleties in his acting. Oddly enough, the weaker performance is the over-energetic Kenneth Branagh. Personally, I love Branagh. His interpretations of Shakespeare are fantastic. Well, his Hamlet left a little to be desired, but anyway, I was surprised that it was Victor Frankenstein and Clerval that I ultimately found irritating. Mostly it was because of the way they were filmed. They used their energy to match the pacing of the film, an unfortunate move on their part. This leads me to my next point. The pacing in the movie is ridiculous. The movie is so concerned with hitting all the major plot points from the book that they rush through every scene. Victor is represented as an intense, passionate man, and the movie tries to match it with speed, editing, revolving cameras, and awkward close-ups. I cannot condemn their efforts. After all, it does tie into the book's romantic themes, if you consider the fast pace as a result of the emotions running high while experiencing the world. But the movie takes on a comedic quality because the rushed seriousness becomes melodramatic. As an unfortunate side effect, it's difficult to suspend disbelief while watching this unintentional outrageousness. Tender moments become insincere. It's difficult to take these characters seriously when all you can see is the camera panning back and forth between two characters, showing these two men, Clerval and Victor, pulling on something with no clear goal being represented. It's very odd. Moving on. It's rare to find a horror film that tries to work as a drama. However, I feel it more accurate to label the movie Mary Shelley's Frankenstein as a drama that plays at being a horror film. It's categorized as horror, drama, science fiction, among other things. The dramatic elements are given the most importance. Mary Shelley made it very apparent that she was trying to write a book that would at least frighten the audience in some way. I read the novel. I wasn't particularly frightened, but there is a difference between horror in novel format and horror in film format. A horror film typically relies on scenes that suddenly startle the audience. A novel doesn't have that ability, so it relies on the tension of impending doom. Both the film and the book have that in common. Since Victor jumps on an express train to his own demise, it's unavoidable. Personally, that's the strongest part of the film. However, since this is a movie that bears the same name as past horror films, they felt they needed to add in moments that startle the audience. These moments feel inserted into the film. Moments like a hand suddenly popping into frame with abrasive musical accompaniment. They have no natural place, and therefore this really works as a poor horror movie. As an interpretation of the novel, I'd say that it's not necessarily bad. I didn't hate the film, but all in all, it failed to achieve the desired level of seriousness. The movie becomes accidentally funny. There are some redeeming elements, but nothing that wasn't in the novel. So I'll give Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the movie that is, a 2 out of 5. It gets an extra 2 for being an adequate representation of the novel's events, save for some ridiculousness that they've added in. Thanks for watching Horror Movie Rewind, and tune in next time for my review of The Reanimator.